Presented by STEM at Home, an initiative launched by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, STEM Talks is a podcast devoted to issues related to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on learning. STEM Ecosystems will continue to bring you lively and informative conversations with thought leaders, parents, students, and others, all thinking about the pandemic and the need for STEM learning. This episode is a panel discussion with 3 superintendents from around the country working to serve their students, families, teachers, and general community during this time. Featuring the conversation are superintendents Dr. Brotschul, Superintendent of Delran Township School District, Patti LaBarm, Superintendent of the Watertown City School District, and Pedro Martinez, Superintendent, San Antonio Independent School District. Welcome to the third webinar in the STEM at Home series, brought to you by TIES and the Global STEM Learning and Ecosystems Initiative. The power and value of STEM and of the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice is more apparent now than ever. Over the last few days, we've heard from so many of you who have questions and are looking for resources, and we've heard from even more of you who have ideas and information to share. We have sessions planned and being planned for community leaders, families, educators, and more. And we'll be hosting these webinars regularly, so make sure to check your email inboxes and stemecosystems.org for announcements. Today is part of our STEM Leaders Community Conversation series, a series of conversations, webinars, and workshops intended for teachers, school officials, community leaders, and the many others impacted by school closures and virtual learning. Embracing the ecosystem way, these gatherings will provide a space and time for leaders to share common challenges, ideas, and resources. Conversations will revolve around successful models and new ideas to support STEM learning experiences during and beyond this time of social distancing. During today's panel, please be sure to use the question tool in the GoToWebinar software. I'll be pulling questions from that list, and we may unmute microphones at the tail end so that some of you can answer questions as well. And now it is my honor to introduce today's panelists. Pedro Martinez joined San Antonio ISD as superintendent in June 2015, bringing to the district a laser-like focus, I love that, on improving academic achievement. As a data-driven leader with in-depth knowledge of academic reform strategies, he firmly believes students will rise to the challenge with the proper supports, that by setting the bar high, many more students will demonstrate the aptitude and aspiration to perform at higher levels and be well prepared for college and career. Pedro, I know that your district was already underway in a multi-year plan to roll out devices to its students, but I'm wondering, and I'm sure others are as well, how has that timeline changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, Jeremy, we were actually developing a 5-year plan to roll out devices. We started with a pilot of 7 campuses out of 100 that we started this last school year, with the goal to go to 100 within 5 years, the majority within 3 years. What is happening right now is we're taking that plan and putting it in place in literally 2 weeks. What the advantage we have is that we've been developing online content now for the last 2 years. More and more of our teachers have been using different tools to communicate with parents and students. But as you can imagine, this completely has changed our world. We have 3,000 teachers as we speak that have been getting training since last week on using different tools like Google Classroom and other tools, where they're actually next week going to be developing, actually this week they're going to be developing lesson plans for our students. So we have about 48,600 students. We also are one of the poorest communities in the country. We have neighbors where 70% of our families don't have any connectivity at all. And we know that because we've been gathering that information. So we also put a purchase in of 30,000 Chromebooks just last week, that with that plus inventory that we have already at the school level, we'll be able to distribute devices. By the way, that's starting as early as in the next day or two. And so the logistics of this is just amazing. We've been doing meals, for example, for our community. We started last week on Monday with a soft launch at 8 schools. We already are at 27 schools and already are doing deliveries with our buses. So it's just, it's an unprecedented need. And unfortunately, here in San Antonio, Texas, everything we're seeing is that it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. We're in a city that's just starting to deal with the epidemic, but we're already have emergency orders in place for employees to work remote. So as you can imagine, just all the logistical challenges that we're going through right now.
Thank you. I'm excited to dig into that a little more as we go on. Next up, we have Patricia Lebar, the superintendent of the Watertown schools in Watertown, New York, formerly a teacher, math coach, and principal in the Watertown School District. Patricia has a focus on student-centered learning and making sure students are prepared for our ever-changing world through STEM. Patty, I know all of our communities are looking to schools for supports in some obvious ways, learning at home, and some less obvious ways. How's your district thinking about using the tools that you already have available to help your community?
Right. So a lot of the obvious things are like, turning to schools for cleaning supplies and toilet paper and all of those kinds of things. But in addition to that, over the weekend, the community reached out and asked about our 3D printers. So I'd like Lisa Blank to share with you, we, in the last 24 hours, started a little process here. And Lisa, if you could just jump in and kind of explain to everybody how that process is working, it's pretty phenomenal.
So one of the interesting things is that sometimes people don't understand the purpose of makerspaces, and this has really brought the purpose of our makerspaces to light. We have 3D printers in every building and makerspace advisors associated with them. So right now we've got 10 staff members. They're tech integration specialists, makerspace advisors, and technology teachers that are all involved in 3D printing at home. We quickly grabbed 3D printers from our school buildings and distributed them to staff members with supplies, and we have additional supplies on order to their homes so that they can engage in this effort with a total of 12 3D printers that are out and in operation. Pretty exciting. We've already got the visors printed to which plastic sheeting is attached as a shield and then elastic that hooks it onto the head. So pretty exciting that they got, within hours of the printer being delivered to staff, they're printing for the good of the community. Oh, and I should say that came from Budman Industries out of Liverpool, New York. A couple that has a business there that's been involved with some of our ecosystems efforts, created the file for these shields, and they made it public. So anybody can use it, and anybody with printers can print using PLA filament.
Outstanding. And finally, Dr. Brian Brotschul, whose name I hopefully didn't mess up for the third time today, has been the superintendent of schools in Delran Township since 2015. Delran rests between Trenton, New Jersey and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and hosts 16,000 residents, 3,000 students, and 400 staff members. Brian, I know that in many ways, schools are a social services organization as much as they are an educational one. I've been concerned, and I, listening to, reading the emails and listening to people talk, I know I'm not alone in how the very many students in our country that rely on schools for healthy meals, how they're even surviving in this time, let alone learning. So I'm wondering how Delran is handling that need and supporting its community.
Well, certainly the nutrition and the well-being for all the students in our charge is a massive priority for the Board of Education and the school district. And it really is our role to take on that social hub concept of the school district and to deliver services that put children and families in the position to be successful. And frankly, during this closure and during this pandemic, the focus really is on food, clothing, and shelter and sustenance, and providing those services from the district level on out. And so certainly our role is primarily academics, but there are so many other layers that we're responsible for every day that we deliver, and we're here to serve, whether it's delivering meals, deploying counselors, focusing on how students are coping and how students are managing and how students are managing the stress is really is, you can't move instruction forward unless you have your finger on the pulse of the community in that sense. So we deliver food to, we've delivered 4,600 meals and we're back at it again tomorrow. And, we anticipate even a greater number than 4,600, somewhere north of 5,000 meals tomorrow. And that's a big piece. And, I talked to a lot of people in town, and a lot of residents have reached out, and, I've shared with them, what our meal distribution schedule is. And honestly, that is their number one priority at this point. Where are we going to get fruit? Where are we going to get vegetables? How am I going to feed my children when, I'm not working, I'm out of work? And that's a critical piece. And we can't help our communities move forward and our communities handle the academic piece until we know that they've had the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy addressed.
You know, I think that's exactly right. Learning is critical. It's really important, but we also can course correct next year, later this year, with some of those things. But some of these needs, there's no way to course correct once the damage is done. I'm wondering if any of the three of you, what you're thinking right now about the other needs that our students have, the social emotional needs, our students that have deep services. How are we addressing those? Pedro, I see you nodding over there. How's your district thinking about addressing those types of needs?
You know, it's one of our biggest challenges, Jeremy. We have the perfect storm. So we have, for example, students that, you know, we were providing therapy right before the spring break started and before this epidemic started here in San Antonio. And so now our counselors are actually providing, you know, they're actually electronically providing counseling sessions the best they can. We actually, at our food centers, food distribution sites, one of the biggest lessons we learned, we needed to have social workers there because families were so worried, as Brian stated earlier, about so many other things, such as things like baby formula and diapers and what to do if, you know, if they're under threat of eviction, and, you know, and what's happening at the city and county level to protect them. So things that were beyond our scope of work, but the families were just asking for help from us. And so it is one of our biggest challenges, Jeremy. The other thing that we are also very attentive to is just giving parents guidance. Parents right now, if they're lucky enough to still have a job, they're working from home, they're trying to keep their children active because they're feeling a lot of pressure. And so we have seen an unprecedented you know, hit on our online resources coming in, not only from people from our district, but from all over, because parents are desperate right now looking for resources for their children. And so it's just this difficult balance, which because we know that, I agree with Brian, we have to have the basics for them, but even after that, we still have the challenges of children just dealing with what's happening around them, as well as our parents as they potentially lose their jobs.
Patti, sounded like you were about to say something.
Well, I'm appreciating listening to Pedro and Brian both, because I think we all share something in common. And as superintendents, we feel like at this point, sometimes you feel like you're on an island, you know, and you're trying to do the best that you can to get through each day. And you're right, you know, I've told our community, I understand the mission of the school is education, but we all have to work together and put that aside for now and make sure that our children's basic needs are being met. And one of the best things that we did early on was we reached out to local community agencies that are all supporting the community. And we're working on ways to really work together to get this entire community through this whole situation. So from reaching out to the United Way and having our Community Action Planning Council. So our Community Action Planning Council is serving the neighbors of Watertown and putting out food to our elderly and to some of our other students. But we're working together. We're getting volunteers from the school district, teachers and staff, and we're using our school buses to get out into areas and trying to meet the needs of the students in our district as well as the elderly. You know, so there's a lot of things going on. I appreciate the Chromebook situation. We're in the same one. This came on rather quickly for all of us. And, you know, we were in a 4-year plan on year 2. So I think that we share a lot in common, and we're all trying to be you know, just as supportive of the communities that we are all living in, the best way we know how.
And if I could jump in, Jeremy, on the topic of technology and Chromebooks, technology was never meant to replace a thoughtful teacher. There is no greater determinant in student achievement than live in-person instruction facilitated by a teacher. And the use of a Chromebook, in my mind here in Delran, is to supplement instruction, not to replace live in-person instruction. And so not only from an equipment perspective, are there some challenges for districts, but we are completely, we've been asked to redesign in a very short window our actual instructional platform and frankly philosophy. So we have an amazingly talented staff in Delran, as as in San Antonio and Watertown, and the teachers have been at the table with us for years in terms of doing what is best for kids. But I think we also have to think about the technological platform piece as far as the delivery of instruction, and B, a lot of the folks that work for us here in Delran are mothers and fathers, and they are caretakers, and man, they are trying their best to keep this all together. And I just like to reinforce that the influx of a technological platform is not a silver bullet, and I still stand firm on the belief that there's no greater determinant on student achievement than a thoughtful teacher.
And Brian, I think one of the things that I know that the district leaders are struggling throughout the country is we have two hats on. So one is dealing with the emergencies today and dealing with the crisis today, but also we got to think ahead. And so part of the messaging that we're giving to our staff is, and we've gotten this with permission from the commissioner, the state commissioner, our testing has been waived this year. And so what I've told staff is, when we look back, and I'm an optimist that we'll, in August or September when we start a new school year, we'll be looking back at this and saying, wow, what an amazing time. But I also want to look back at it and say, okay, what is it that we could have done better? What is it that we should have done that we didn't do? And so part of it for us is, as we look at whether it's we're providing the basic needs around food, et cetera, or as we're changing, or as we're distributing our remote learning model, that we plan for it correctly, that we are personal in the way we're touching base with our children. So I've been amazed by the amount of outreach that our teachers are doing, most of it virtual, to our students, where they're literally calling students, FaceTiming students. I have teachers that are reading stories to students on a daily basis. And Brian, what you said is really important. Our staff also have those challenges. They have their own children at home. Some of them also have elderly parents that they're taking care of, and they're very fearful. They're very fearful about what could happen because, when you read the news, the cases are just going up dramatically. And so we're trying to figure out how to balance what's happening right now, as well as thinking ahead months from now, because our students are going to be back at school. For students that live in poverty, their gaps are going to be even that much wider, and we're going to be right back to our traditional accountability systems. And so it's just a huge challenge, and I applaud both Patti and Brian, but all my colleagues around the country, because we're all trying to figure this out.
I think those are all really important things to think about. Hey, Veronica, in a second, I'd like to unmute Melissa Dubois, I'm not sure which one, to ask a question that she posted. But while we're getting ready for that, for the three of you, I think about my kids and kind of related to all of this. One of them in particular is very socially motivated. And frankly, she's really struggling right now because she relies on that sense of community that she gets from being in school. She misses school in general, but even more than that, she misses hugging her teacher in the morning. She misses seeing her friends and playing with them. And I'm wondering how you're all thinking about those social needs that our growing students really require in order to be successful in life, and how we can address those needs. Brian, do you have any thoughts on that? Oops.
I can jump in.
Sure, Patti, go ahead. Lost Patti for a second. Are you back now?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the things that we do for that social piece is we have our teachers by phone because we're nowhere near ready yet. We're starting to unroll things very slowly, but our mission definitely is to take care of our students first and their emotional well-being. So we have teachers making, and it's not just the teacher, it might be anybody that touches a student in the school. So if it's a phys ed teacher, music teacher, we're all working together as a team to make that happen. Are you guys still there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
You are fuzzing out a little bit.
So Yep. So we're doing things like that, but we also have social workers and counselors that are also reaching out to students. But the student to student piece, right now we're just making sure those basic needs are met. And then hopefully as, some of our colleagues in other schools, they're doing, having joint sessions with their kids getting together and having kids really just talk to make sure that kids are kind of socializing, but in a different way.
We're actually, oh, go ahead, Brian. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, so, one of the things we're training our teachers on as they're using different electronic tools is how to have, first of all, principals right now are doing virtual planning meetings with their teachers. We're doing all of our training virtually, but it's also for teachers who want to be engaging their students during specific times of the day, the way they can have students interacting with each other, because there's ways to do grouping. And the only thing that we are asking, this is related to the question that I see, we are telling our teachers that the expectation is not to have an 8 to 4 school day. That it's going to be, we're going to have, for example, all of our, anything we do is going to have to be recorded so that in case students or parents need to access it at a different time because of their own personal situation. But to just set up, for us, what's going to be more important, especially in the beginning, is to make a personal connection with our students. Because what we don't want, and you said this earlier, Brian, we don't want computers all of a sudden, or homework packets to replace the physical contact or the relationships that we've been building with students all year long. And so for us, it does create a different challenge about how do we keep those relationships going. But like I said, I'm seeing creative things already, such as teachers FaceTiming students, even parents themselves are setting up FaceTime play dates with their children, and so again, it's just, I'm seeing more and more ideas come out, but it's a huge challenge for all of us.
To kind of piggyback on that, in my discussions with teachers over the phone or over video, I've asked them for feedback and asked them what's your biggest complaint right now, and every single one of them has said, I can't see my kids. And that's a big deal. I've had discussions with folks that are in custodial and they're the lunch aides in our cafeterias. They work on our school buses. They're all saying, I can't see the kids. I miss the kids. And so I absolutely echo the concerns and the work that's being done to support kids between teachers and homes. But our job too is to really lead adults and to support adults too. They're doing something that in a million years they never thought they'd be doing, which is delivering online instruction. This is not when they woke up and decided they wanted to be teachers, 20, 30 years ago when they were kids, none of them said, I want to get on my computer and be a digital instructor. I have a daughter who dearly wants to be a teacher. We have a teaching area set up in our basement. She's 11th grade and she's absolutely going into the career. But she never once has said, I'm dying to be a digital instructor. She wants to deal with people. She wants to deal with kids. And there's that level of stress that's being placed upon the districts to be able to afford that connectivity when appropriate to teachers. And so it really does go full circle from kids to adults and everybody in between.
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep in mind too, for anyone who's listening to this who's not an educator themselves. I think there's a perception out there that this is a mini vacation for teachers. And I can only speak anecdotally, but my wife, who's a 7th grade teacher, is absolutely putting in more hours right now than she typically does. And she's an overachiever to begin with. So it's a lot of hours. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, actually directly to the things that Pedro and Brian were talking about, how we as superintendents, as community leaders, can support teaching. So to start that, I'd like to ask Melissa, if she's still on here, to ask her question. And then after that, I'd like to jump over to Alan Kirby, who has a related question. Melissa, are you on?
I am. Hi, this is Melissa Dubois in Oregon. And I do think that we've really started to get to this question, but I'm curious about how you're supporting teachers in reframing what education looks like right now. And as I said, Dr. Martinez began to get at that. I'm also curious how you're maybe speaking with partners outside of education who maybe don't understand that it's not just about getting some learning resources on the computer, that these personal touches are important, because I'm hearing some of that as well. So the two parts of the question are really, how are we supporting teachers in reframing, and then how are we supporting our communities in reframing what it can look like?
So the first thing I would say is I think it's important for all of us to allow teachers to make mistakes. In other words, you know, the message that we're giving our teachers is this is a safe space for us because we don't have standardized testing that's going to occur this year. Although it creates some other challenges, in some ways it'll be a blessing for us because we can look at implementing a remote learning plan in a safer space where we don't have to worry about testing assessments or the assessments, you know, over our heads. At the same time, making sure that the biggest lesson for us is how do we make it personal for our students? In other words, we're empowering school principals and their teachers who know their children the best. We give them some tools that everybody can leverage, but in essence, they're creating plans that are going to be more specific to their children. And I'll give you one example. We just developed an app over the weekend, and literally did it over the weekend, where we're going to be tracking and giving a tool for teachers around how to connect with their students and how to track that. And also showing, you know, how counselors will be connecting with students, the clerical staff, how they're going to be connecting with parents. And so we never, you know, we've always taken for granted that, well, you know, we have them in our buildings. We don't have to, you know, that's the way we connect with them. But now in this medium, creating those kind of tools, and it's our technology department, frankly, working with our teams around the clock. They're working 24 hours a day on creating these tools for them. And then the way we're engaging partners is, for example, communities and schools. When we started seeing the needs that families had around, you know, getting services, getting access to baby formula and diapers, getting even basic health information, we actually took our nurses as well as our community partners and said, can we team up together? Because parents, you know, our families need help. And unfortunately, you know, even though we all work together well, when you have a crisis like this, sometimes it's hard to coordinate everything. I'm jealous of what Patti and some of the planning they've been able to do in her area. Ours, they're coming together, but again, it's been a little bit more fragmented.
And if I could jump in, Ms. Dubois, and Delran, I think the biggest stressor is that teachers still want to hold themselves to the very high standard digitally as they do in person. And so I think over the first week of this approach, teachers put a lot of stress on themselves to deliver live streaming instruction for the duration of the school day. And as far as actually reframing my work with them is to kind of share that that's not really my expectation, to be streaming live all day. In addition, it opens up a host of concerns that I have operationally. You know, when teachers and kids are live streaming all day, you lose a lot of control that way, and it does open you up for some concerns. But you know, my approach with principals and with teachers with whom I've talked to has been to have a flipped model to instruction more so than a live streaming, live in person model. And you know, the leadership, frankly, does come from the top. I met with my teachers a few days before closure, and I asked them for a longer leash than usual. I shared with them that I'll take missteps as well, because this matter literally evolves every 30 minutes. You know, there's a new piece to consider and there's a new challenge, and every single decision matters, and every single decision has capillaries throughout the organization and frankly throughout the township. So, and that's always the case for superintendents, but for some reason it just feels like every decision and every question we get asked now has a larger level of impact. So our job is to reframe for the teachers to ensure with them that they are doing their absolute best, and I know they are. And our job is to eliminate some of the stress that they're putting on themselves to be live streaming all day long, because that's not really in my area of expectations.
Yeah, and I would like to add,
Sorry,
I just like to add to what they both said, because in reframing the teachers and their perspective, it's time for us also to make sure that our community and reframe some of the thought processes that are coming through from some of the parent questions that we're getting, right? Because we have some kids that are, and some families that are struggling to get still struggling to meet basic needs, but yet we have other parents who are looking for the advanced coursework to come through. So we have to do some reframing and give our teachers that license and that backing that we're going to be behind them 100%. Yet at the same time, we have to reframe some of the mindsets of our parents in the community to make sure that they understand our mission, and at this time, is also to provide equitable resources to our children, and that's another thing that we're all striving to balance as well.
We're having, I think, a little bit of difficulty with Alan's microphone, so I just wanted to ask his question for him, Alan Kirby. He's asking how hands-on and project-based learning, which I'm sure are things that you're thinking about generally prior to this, but how, if at all, that can be extended to this type of circumstance, or right now, are we just trying to get the basics out there? What are we thinking?
A lot of the
Pedro?
activities that
Patti?
we've posted by grade level on our website at this point, if you look through each grade level, I think this is the perfect opportunity to be promoting project-based learning. It's the perfect time for this. I can see Brian and Pedro both shaking, so I think we're all in this together.
We're all together, but it does create a capacity challenge for us to really formulate and formalize a project-based learning approach. I think that's a challenge from a consistency piece, and I think as you move across in dealing with this challenge, you want to be able to ensure that, as an example, every single child in third grade is receiving the same level and quality of instruction, and so equity is important, but being able to put all of your third grade teachers to have that skill set is important too, from a consistency piece.
Right.
But I absolutely want to challenge and support the teachers that want to move in that direction. That's critical too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is how to balance. We're going to have expert teachers that are going to be doing, some really interesting virtual lesson plans starting next week. And one of the things we're figuring out is, how do we have an expert fourth grade teacher, but we have, easily a couple hundred fourth grade teachers district wide. How do we engage, different fourth grade teachers and how they're supporting children? And so those are lessons that we're learning, and that will include project-based learning lesson plans. So I think right now I'm more in the mode, and this goes back to what we said earlier. We're telling teachers, let's figure it out together. I mean, this is a time for us to really be thinking about, because as you said, Brian, they all want to hold themselves up to this higher standard. And I think for us, what we're saying is, let's leverage expertise that exists within you. Let's learn together. And in our district, the main priority is making sure that we still don't lose the personal relationships with the students. So whatever we're doing, how do we engage all of our different staff and making those connections with students? So again, it's a work in progress. And so I would ask, let us figure it out. I'm hoping in a couple of months we'll have some really good lessons that we have learned, and I'm pretty sure all my colleagues will also have lessons to share that hopefully will help us just be a stronger system overall.
Alyssa, Veronica, if you're listening, I think that's a really good idea. I think we might want to consider having the same panel back in 2, 3, 4 months, some amount of time, to talk about these same things, ask some of these same questions, and see how they've evolved. As we're thinking about not just project-based learning, but any kind of learning, several folks, Carrie McGann, Lakeisha, some other folks have asked the very similar question, which is, how are you shifting grading policy in not only just this general scenario, but also the scenario where we have students have devices, students don't, students who have engaged parents, students who don't. So students are learning in vastly different circumstances. So how are we making sure that grading is fair and equitable in that type of scenario? Brian, could you kick us off?
Well, we did. One of the challenges administratively and from a leadership perspective is the guidance from the CDC was constantly evolving. So we went into this, and the guidance at the time was that you would be looking at a 14 calendar day shutdown. A 14 calendar day shutdown looks vastly different than what we're in for right now. It certainly looks like it's longer term. So our initial work with our staff here was to have a pass-fail grading structure in order to allow all the players to get their feet firmly on the ground.
Yeah.
So we're actually at the point now where we are looking at the shutdown in two different ways, in two different kind of waves. The first wave is to get to April 9th, which is the last day before our spring recess. And then the second wave is once April 20th comes, to be able to deliver instruction that continues to be high quality, but in a different format, primarily digital. So from a grading perspective, I would anticipate that we would move more towards a traditional, our traditional grades, rather than the pass-fail as we move through the late spring. But there are a host of equity concerns and challenges that we have to deal with on our own. So I think that target will continually be shifting. Really, the word of this entire shutdown is flexibility, and we need to exercise it from the top, and we need to support those that are on the front lines in order to exercise that level of flexibility. And I know that in Delran, the level of connectivity that the teachers have with their kids, the information that they're reporting back from the front lines absolutely needs to be applied in logical, rational ways that support kids through what could potentially be the most traumatic experience of their lifetime.
Yeah, for us, we're looking at those issues now, and what we're doing is we're actually, even though we have 3,200 teachers and 100 principals, we're engaging principals and teachers as we think it through. And the complications right now are, we have, for example, high school students. And so the one blessing we have is that this occurred for us, right after, the shutdown occurred right after spring break. So we have, we have, 3/4 of the year, the school year behind us, and we know what those grades look like. So really for us, it's figuring out these last 9 weeks. And as Brian said, part of the challenge right now is we're scheduled to be closed through April 3rd. We will probably be announcing an extension of that closure, but we haven't decided yet that we're going to be closed for the entire school year. So we're trying to figure out how to keep the flexibility we need in case things change, because things are changing so fast. So as we speak right now, we're engaging teachers this week around ideas around not only grading practices, but also even in our state, deciding, because we won't have the state assessments, how we decide whether 5th graders are ready to go to the next grade level for 6th grade, whether 8th graders are ready to go to 9th grade, because all that power is going to come back to our schools to make those decisions, because it used to be driven by the state assessments. And so those are practices that we're going to have to be putting in place, and enhancing just based on the information we have in terms of the waiver of the state assessments.
Things that we've been talking about a lot is wondering how companies, organizations, consultants, any of those types of categories can be helpful to school districts in this time. And Ezra had a question that was kind of similar to that. So I'm hoping that Ezra is available. And after that, I'd like Karen from the Great Lakes Science Center to ask the question that she posted. Ezra, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me? Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah, I actually had a question. I was wondering, organizations and companies that either work with schools or maybe they don't, but what can they do, or what can we do to kind of step up and support our school partners and communities at this time?
Go ahead, Patti.
Getting audio from you, so I'm gonna have Pedro answer while you see if you can figure that out, and then we'll jump back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a challenging time because as it is, the irony is that, we're not allowed to, we're trying to limit physical contact. And so unfortunately, it's been a real frustration for many of our partners who want to be involved, but again, we're restricted, just even having physical contact. I think what I would ask companies to think about now is, we're going to get through this in the next, hopefully the next month or two. And I think we're going to discover so many different challenges that existed in terms of gaps, in terms of content, gaps in terms of, different applications. Definitely issues around equity, around access to broadband is probably my biggest challenge right now in San Antonio. And I think it's really important for the community to come together and companies to come together to really figure out how to solve that, because it is an area that has been the digital divide has been around forever, and shame on us if we don't take this crisis and use it as an opportunity to really permanently solve that problem, because it has to be solved. And if this is what it's going to take to solve it, then let's get together and figure out how to solve it.
Over to Patti on that one. You brought up something, Pedro, that I think we touched on earlier, but I don't know. I just think it's so critical and so top of my mind, right up there almost with food. Is we have so many families who are not connected to the internet. A lot of these solutions are so internet based, and I have this really deep concern that the digital divide that we already have is just massively widening right now. We have kids who have access, who are continuing to learn, and kids who don't, who aren't. So I'm really wondering what efforts, Pedro, you have, and Brian and Patti as well, to get more families with internet access. So not just those devices. How are we getting internet access to our most needy families?
So for us, everything's on the table. We started putting Wi-Fi in every one of our buses. We have about 200 bus routes that we do on a daily basis, and we're actually, looking at, we leverage the buses. We're actually reaching out to vendors and to companies around getting permanent equipment across neighborhoods to be able to expand broadband. But I'll tell you, it is our biggest challenge right now. We're actually securing with vendors and trying to get discounted prices on hotspots. And one of the challenges is that, cable companies and telephone companies are reaching out to families saying, we have free internet for you, but the problem is these families have to sign on a long-term plan. And it might be free for a month or two, but then after that they have to pay for it and they can't afford it. It's the reason why they didn't have it in the first place. And so again, we need to add, this is one area, Jeremy, that I'm going to say we need people to step up. This is an area that has been in existence for a long time, all across the country. And like you said, it's only going to get worse during these times.
I'm coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, who has the dubious distinction of having the lowest internet access for high poverty families in the country. So I'm right there with you. Maybe it's time for this to start becoming a internet as utility conversation at a really deep level. Brian, Patti, are you guys addressing internet access right now or thinking about it?
Yep, we're on the same lines as Pedro right now as well.
And in Delran Township, I think throughout this process, we learned the hard way at the percentage of students that we serve that either don't have a device or don't have access, or both. And it's much higher than you would think for a community of our demographic makeup. And certainly it speaks to a host of challenges. And at the same time, going back to the question of what can industry do to support districts, I think conceptually the children we're teaching, as they say, are digital natives, and their parents and their grandparents are digital immigrants. They're new to this entire platform. So like outside of placing some orders on Amazon or checking on a status on Facebook, they don't necessarily use computers from an application perspective in either their work or their personal lives. So if we could have large scale initiatives in order to assimilate parents and grandparents to the use of computers, that would be a huge benefit for us. Delran Township is in the top 10 per capita of families in New Jersey that have grandparents as the primary caregiver. And going digital is a big challenge for that group. during this particular shutdown. And so it's something that is resonating very deeply with us, that we are actually asking them to support a platform of instruction that they have, that it really is like speaking another language. And so asking a parent or a grandparent to do that, frankly, is unfair, and it creates a widening equity gap that continues to be a huge area of concern for all of us.
And I was, prior to joining Ties in the ecosystems, I was in school districts for 16 years. And I think that we saw a lot of that in our work, right? That number one, we have parents and grandparents who, I think we as schools make this assumption, don't want to learn and or can't, and neither of those are true. Want to learn and they can. And we also have this population of very young parents, some of the parents of our younger kids, who we make the assumption, we use that phrase that I hate, digital natives. And we say, well, they're digital natives, they can figure it out. There's a vast difference between using these tools for consumption of content and media and using them to interact and create. I think it's incumbent upon us to really think about that. I'm glad you brought that up. We have a few folks in the session today who are from museums, Kelly and some others. I'd like to have Karen from the Great Lakes Science Center ask her question about community involvement. No problem. I fortunately have it written down, so I will ask.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, how are you guys? I was wondering, what are your greatest needs that informal STEM institutions like ourselves can help fill for both your teachers and your families?
Honestly, in Delran, our greatest need is to assimilate adults with technological platforms. That's really, to me, the main challenge that we would have to be able to successfully make a transition to this type of instruction.
I think for us, especially once we get a little bit more relief in terms of people being able to, go out, because right now our museums are closed down. They've been ordered to be closed down, and any place you can gather has been closed down here in San Antonio. And so for us, my hope is that this will last weeks and not months, and that when that comes back, the amount of parents are just gonna need to take their children out, and ideally it would be having centers open up their doors, not charging them, just to get the children out of their houses, getting them back into areas where they can socialize with other children, where they can learn and appreciate the beauty of both museums and art places. I think something like that would be meaningful to our community, because the last thing I want is for families who can't afford these museums still not able to go, because that barrier will exist. It might be worse because maybe they have been laid off now because of the economy, the economic ramifications.
Karen, to add to Brian and Pedro's responses, I love the content that you and other museums are creating, and I think it's great, and I think you should keep providing that. I think parents use it, and some teachers use that content as well. But when Brian was answering, I was just thinking that organizations like the Science Center, your employees tend to be more techie than standard employees maybe everywhere. And I wonder if this is an opportunity to not just be thinking about the sort of prototypical science lessons, but also you have a techie staff. How could they perhaps be providing not in person, but remote lessons to parents and grandparents on how to use this technology, opportunities to ask questions and interact with the community in ways that aren't in the typical sort of schema of the museum. So before we close off, we have about 10 minutes left. I have two questions that I'd like each of you, I hope, to answer. The first is, what lessons, they're both about lessons learned. What lessons are we learning right now that can transfer into more traditional schooling when it happens? What are we learning about the needs of our students, the needs of our teachers, that can apply to standard school when we go back? How does school change for the better? And perhaps more importantly, and this is kind of to follow up on Pedro's very good soundbite earlier, what lessons are we learning now? What needs to be put into place when we get back so that we are actually prepared next time? So what are we learning now that can be applied to school in session? And what are we learning now that we need to fix as schools and school communities in order to be prepared if something like this happens again? Patti, could you kick us off? What lessons are we learning? Patti, I for some reason, I don't know why, I apologize, I think we lost you again. Did a quick click. All right, I'm gonna jump over to Brian and then we'll go back to Patti after that. Brian?
So I think what strikes me is that we're relearning how much kids rely on schools. We're relearning how much kids love their teachers. And we're relearning, again, the social hub that the school district provides in so many different ways. And I think almost every parent that's not an educator out there is relearning the power of those that have chosen to become educators, because it is a skill. I can't build a house. I can't frame, a new home. And I understand that that's a skill. Instruction is a skill. Connecting with kids is a skill. So I think we relearned that, and we have a deeper appreciation, I think, for the entire field of education. That's my big aha moment and takeaway, the fact that we have so much power and so much influence to do so many great things in our communities, whether we're doing it from a distance perspective or in person.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, I would add that, to me, what I hope is the biggest lesson is how important schools are in communities and how important teachers are, and how important it is just for the daily lives of our community members. I joke about this, that, I don't think parents realize the fact that teachers make them better parents. The fact that our children can be in schools, for so many hours every day, and really allows parents to still go on with their lives. And what's great, and Brian, you said it, both our teachers and children have a special connection that no technology, nothing can ever replace. And so for us, this has been reinforced to us. And of course, what I love is that I'm seeing the creativity of our educators and trying to continue to promote that. So for me, I think that's my biggest lesson.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I would say to you, I agree with both Brian and Pedro, and we've been forced to take a pause right now, but being forced to do this has taught us so many valuable lessons. And I just echo what both of you have said, and I truly appreciate the opportunity for this conversation today.
Thank you all. I wanted to call out one quick question from Pavi, who's asking whether or not there are resources available, lists of organizations that are stepping up to help schools. And Alyssa Briggs wanted me to share that yes, and that a list of those types of resources and organizations will be going up on the STEM Ecosystems website this afternoon, and we'll keep updating it. I'd also like to let everyone who's listening know that we will continue this conversation, particularly around connectivity and the digital divide, with future sessions, and hopefully bring these three superintendents back in to discuss lessons learned as time goes on and as lessons are learned. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking an hour of time out of your very, very busy days. And we thank you all who are listening for joining us. This has been the STEM at Home series, brought to you by the Global STEM Learning Ecosystems Initiative. Sessions like this one will be coming out multiple times a week, and we look forward to continuing to engage with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've just heard STEM Talks. Watch your inboxes for our next podcast. And in the meantime, be safe and healthy, and remember that your work with STEM is changing lives and improving communities.